Great. Well, I think we should start the event now. So hello and welcome to the Future Speaks Highlands and Islands. The Future Speaks is a series of 8 events held in all of the electoral regions of Scotland. They're organised by Fridays for Future Scotland, which is a youth-led organisation campaigning for the decarbonisation of Scotland, and also Teach the Future, which is also a youth-led campaign pushing for a broad climate education in the UK. The next Future Speaks events are on the 2nd of April for Central Scotland, on the 16th of April for the northeast of Scotland, and the 30th of April for Glasgow. So if you know anyone in these regions, send them along. It's a really important event. These events allow young people to engage with their elected representatives and prospective candidates on issues surrounding the climate and ecological crisis. It's particularly important this time that young people are given a platform to question their politicians, particularly because the Holyrood elections are coming up on the 6th of May, and young people in particular want to know that their representatives that they vote for are really going to be focusing and putting the necessary time and effort into policies which will achieve climate justice. My name's Ariane, and I'm 20 years old. I'm from Nairn, and I'm a volunteer with Fridays for Future Scotland, and I'll be the chair for this event. I'd now like to introduce the youth panelists, starting with Holly. Do you want to go?
Sorry, do I introduce myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. Hi, I'm Holly. My name is Holly, I'm 15, she, her pronouns, from Fort William. And yeah, I'm involved with Fridays for Future Scotland.
Great, thank you, Holly. I'd now like to go on to May. May, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm May, and I'm a 17-year-old youth climate striker and climate activist with Fridays for Future Scotland. I joined the International Fridays for Future Youth Climate Strike movement a year ago this month, and since then I've become involved with a number of different climate coalitions and groups, including the COP26 coalition to build movement solidarity in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow this November. I'm both a part of the Highlands local group of Fridays for Future Scotland and a member of the national organising team, which organises and coordinates Scotland-wide actions to push for climate justice. I also pursue a career in ecosystem conservation and climate science while still becoming a climate activist. I pass to you, Lily.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm 16. I'm from Inverness. I also volunteer with Fridays for Future Scotland, and I'm a Scotland campaign coordinator at Teach the Future as well. I got involved in the climate movement just over a year ago now, when I first attended one of the strikes in Inverness along with a bunch of my friends, and ever since then I've kind of just taken part in the local strikes and more recently kind of the national organising in both of the groups as well.
Great, thank you everyone. I'd now like to give some time for the politicians to introduce themselves, and I'd like to start with Mary Todd from the SNP. Mary, would you like to go?
There we go, rookie error. Thanks, Erin. It's great to be here this evening with you all. My name's Marie Todd, and I'm standing in Caithness, Sutherland and Ross, and I'm also standing on the Highlands and Islands list. I'm currently an MSP for the Highlands and Islands region, and I'm also Minister for Children and Young People, so it is absolutely brilliant to see in the week that we incorporated UNCRC into Scots law, Article 12 in action, and all of you youngsters holding power to account. Thank you very much for inviting me along. Cheers.
Great, thanks for that. Alan Reid from the Lib Dems, would you like to go?
Okay, thanks, Erin. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to this important event, because obviously climate change is the most important issue that we face. I live in Dunoon. I'm the Liberal Democrat constituency candidate in Ardislan Butte, and I'm the top candidate on the Liberal Democrat Highlands and Islands regional list. I was the Member of Parliament for Ardislan Butte for 14 years. I'm now a councillor on Ardislan Butte Council, and I'm on the Council's Environment, Development and Infrastructure Committee. Before being elected to Parliament, I worked as a computer programmer and I'm looking forward to this exciting event tonight.
That's great, thank you. Next, we'll have Ariane Burgess from the Scottish Greens.
Hello. Yes, thank you for the invitation to the event. So I've been a climate activist for a long time, both creating climate curriculums for primary and high school students, and also as a direct action activist, being arrested a number of times around the climate. At some point, I realized I needed to stop doing the direct action, which is really, really important, and started to look for solutions. So most of my work has been focused around how do we transition community scale to respond to the climate. So a lot of different solutions around our ecological, our social design, and also the economic design of things. And one of my loves at the moment is a project where I've been creating an outdoor, what I call an outdoor learning space, which is in a small community forest garden. We've got an amazing building now to invite people to actually come and learn on the land and start to develop the skills we need to build the future we want to see.
That's great, thank you. And lastly, we'll have John Erskine from Labour.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me along. I'm John Erskine. I'm the Scottish Labour Party candidate for Skyloch, Aber and Badenoch, and I'm also our #2 candidate on the Highlands and Islands regional list. I was also recently appointed the Scottish Labour Energy, Connectivity and Island spokesperson, so I really appreciate you having me along tonight. I think climate recovery is a key part of our economic recovery from COVID, and we need to invest in green jobs and seize Scotland's opportunity of hosting COP26 to champion an ambitious climate justice plan. So thank you so much for having me tonight, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Cool, thank you. It's great to have you all here tonight. I'd just like to explain how we're going to run the event. So the youth panelists are going to take it in turns to ask pre-prepared questions, and we'll then give each of the politicians a chance to respond one by one. Each politician should aim to answer the question in 1 minute, and there'll be a timer that goes off after 90 seconds. So if you're overrunning, you'll be asked to stop at that point and we'll move on. I'll put my hand up when you have 10 seconds left, just to give you a wee warning. This event is going to run until 6:30. And so if we get through the pre-prepared questions and still have time, we'll then move on to any live Q&A questions. And these are being monitored, so if you have any questions that you think of while we're discussing, then please submit any questions you have. We'll then finish with our student panelists making a closing statement each, and then we'll wrap up. I hope you all find this event really informative, and now we'll start with the first question, which comes from Holly.
Yeah, so affordable and accessible green public transport is essential, especially for young people travelling for work and education across the large areas and decentralised communities of the Highlands. We must ensure that public transport is accessible and not too high cost for young people to access, considering younger people are generally in lower income brackets, and that the cost of train tickets in Scotland has risen above inflation. How can your party integrate rail, bus, and any other public transport timetables so that there is a practical incentive to travel sustainably for the public?
Great, thanks for that, Holly. And we'll start with Mary Todd. If you want to go now.
Hi there, thanks. Absolutely perfect question, because I think up here in the Highlands and Islands, connectivity and that ability to get about is the key to life. So it's really, really important. There's a couple of points I would like to make. One is that the SNP are introducing free bus travel for young people, which I think will be really helpful. It will apply right across Scotland. So I think of my own children who down to university and things like that, that will make a real difference to how easy it is for them to get back home. And I think it's a real incentive to use public transport. We're also doubling the active transport, or we have doubled the active transport budget. And I think that's a really important part of connecting this picture so that it's easy to go places on your bike. But in the vast area of the Highlands, we need to be able to get our bikes onto trains and get our bikes onto buses. I think we need to probably consider some creative solutions, like combining both of those things. I am quite a fan. Drew Henry came up with years ago the concept of Boris bikes for the Highlands, which would be electric bikes. And I do think that we would be able to connect our communities using electric bikes in a way that we probably can't manage, all of us, with push bikes. And I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Mary. And we'll now move on to John, if you're ready to go.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. You know, absolutely. Transport, I think, is responsible for more than a third of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions, which we all know contributes towards 2,500 deaths every year in Scotland through air pollution. So what we really need is transport policies that will promote environmental sustainability and help people become much less reliant on their cars. So this includes tackling the decline in bus passengers, you know, even before the pandemic, by supporting councils to run their own bus services and creating a bus fleet moving towards free universal bus travel can certainly get people out of their cars and onto public transport. I'm pleased to see that Abellio ScotRail is now going to be taken into public hands, and I would like to see Scotland's bus services also taken into public hands, and that would allow us to have a much better integration of all of Scotland's public transport systems. Active travel, of course, as Marie said, is key to that. We need to get people out of their cars, and particularly in our cities, onto bikes, walking, and other public transport to help people tackle the obesity crisis and also to help create a cleaner, greener environment. So yeah, tackling that 1/3 of pollution in Scotland that comes from transport and getting people onto alternative methods is the way forward.
Great, thank you very much. We'll next have Alan Reid.
Thank you, Erin. It's a very important question. As John has said, transport is a very large part of our greenhouse gas emissions. We have to change the way we organise public transport in Scotland. We should be setting up regional transport partnerships. That is local partnerships with local councillors on them to represent the community. And those regional transport partnerships should be deciding which bus routes operate and when they operate, so that they're integrated with trains and ferries, instead of the moment of allowing where we allow the bus companies to cherry pick the profitable routes and the council's left to subsidise the unprofitable routes. The council should be deciding where and when the buses run, and so that they serve the community properly. We need to convert our buses to be electric vehicles so that they're not emitting greenhouse gases. And it really is, and I'm delighted that young people are going to get the cheap bus fares, but that has to be extended to ferries. For example, here in Dunoon, if young people go to college, they have to use the ferry. So extend the cheaper bus fares to ferries as well. But above all, we need an integrated transport policy run by local regional committees.
Thank you, beautiful. And lastly, we'll have Ariane Burgess.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm really glad that Marie mentioned the free bus travel, which was a green win, and we're going to be extending it to under 22s, and the Greens want to have that extend actually to everyone being able to travel for free by bus. That's absolutely what we need to do if we're going to make public transport attractive. We need to make it affordable and accessible in that way. I think we also absolutely need to extend that to ferries for those of us who live on islands. The Greens recently launched our Rail for All plan, which is a fully costed plan of 22 billion rolled out over 20 years. And that's absolutely, to me, the accessible rail is a backbone that we should be properly investing in, and then having the links to our rural communities. And if we bring buses into public ownership as well, then we can do that joined up scheduling that you see if you travel to any other European country, Norway, Netherlands, and so on. It's the free transport piece is doable. There's examples, for example, Luxembourg is already doing it, and also Tallinn in Estonia. So we have the models, we can do it too.
Thank you, that's great. We'll move on to our second question now. And thanks for all those great responses. And this question will be asked by May.
Opportunity to tackle the climate and ecological emergency, as Caithness and Sutherland have 400,000 hectares of peat bogs. The bucket bogs are important carbon sinks, holding up to 140 years worth of Scotland's current annual emissions. They also ensure that we have clean drinking water and support unique biodiversity. However, they are still being deliberately damaged through burning and extraction due to damaging land practices, such as driven grass moors. What will you and your party do to ensure that our peat bogs are protected? And what are your policies on land reform?
Thanks for that, May. We'll now have John Erskine responding.
Thanks, May. That's an excellent question. We absolutely need to get green policies and green environmental targets into every strand of life and policy making in Scotland. So that runs through planning, education, and into the environmental standards that we want to set out. Obviously, Caithness is key to Europe's largest peat bog, and that's a good bit of biodiversity that we have in the Highlands that we need to preserve and expand on. Looking at things like driven grouse moors, we need to look at ending unsustainable practices and promote the sustainable development of our uplands in the interest of everyone. So, if we look at woodland expansion, for example, we need to plant more trees in Scotland, and we need to make sure that we can support native species and the regeneration of native peatland and bogland in Scotland. So, entirely grounding all of our policies, planning, environment, education, with a green agenda at the core means that we can utilise land reform effectively to return Scotland to the natural environment that we all want to see to tackle greenhouse gases and drive towards a net zero carbon economy in Scotland.
Great, thanks for that. We'll now have Alan Reid.
Yes, our peatlands are very, very important. It has tremendous potential for absorbing carbon, and it's also a very important habitat for rare birds. Now, unfortunately, in much of Scotland, the peatland has been degraded over many years, and what it now needs is a concerted programme of peatland restoration to restore the biodiversity and the potential for capturing carbon. Now, this is a long-term project, so it needs multi-year funding from the Scottish Government to restore the peatland properly, and that has to be an important objective of the next Scottish Government. Planting more trees is also important for absorbing carbon. So yeah, we need to restore our peatland and plant more trees.
Great, thank you. Wonderfully concise we'll now have Ariane.
Yes, the flow country is absolutely important, and we need to defend it with our lives. Absolutely. So yes, more investment to protecting it and peat restoration. And also we need to, in terms of land reform, we need to look to breaking up monopolies. We need to regulate what happens. We need transparent planning around what landowners are planning to do with their land. And we also need to create a national registry so that we can take precious areas into you know, under our stewardship and make sure that they're cared for.
Great, thank you very much. And now, lastly, we'll have Mary Todd.
Thanks very much. I absolutely love the Flow Country, and I couldn't be more passionate about restoring peatland. I think one thing that we need to do is help everybody out there to understand just how significant peatland is in terms of carbon storage. And I mean, the biodiversity and the birds and all of that is just amazing, but the really magical work that goes on in the blanket bogs like we have up in Caithness is that carbon capture. The Flow Country's peat bogs alone capture about 400 million tonnes of carbon, which is more than double the amount in all of Britain's woodlands. So it's really, really spectacularly efficient and important that we invest in peatland restoration. The SNP government have made that a priority over the last few years. You'll see a budget line on peatland restoration, and you see targets on peatland restoration. And just this week, we launched a new plan to keep crofting at the heart of rural communities, and within that plan was a line on encouraging peatland restoration as part of crofting going forward. So we're weaving it into absolutely everything going forward, and that's because of the significance it holds in our future. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That I think I'll link into some of the questions later on tonight. And our third question is from Lily.
According to a recent Scottish Government report on renewable and low carbon energy, they said that Scotland had a unique potential to develop and deploy a wave and tidal energy that is committed to ensuring onshore wind is the lowest cost new built electricity generations in the UK, and it has an important role to play in achieving the target of meeting 100% of Scotland's electricity demand from renewable sources by 2020. How would your government realise the potential for and develop Scotland's green energy industry, especially in the context of wind and tidal power, which the Scottish Government says Scotland is especially suited for?
Great, thanks for that question, Lily. We'll start with Alan this time.
Yes, that's correct. Scotland has tremendous potential to generate electricity from renewables. We have made great strides in recent years, but clearly we need to go a lot further. And the next Scottish Government has to encourage the development of all forms of green energy, including wind, wave and tidal. Because we have a real challenge in that we need to generate actually much more electricity, because we have to transform our transport sector from running on petrol and diesel to running on electricity. But that only works if we generate the extra electricity that is actually needed to run all these vehicles. So we do need Scottish Government to invest in all these forms of green energy. And also that should bring jobs to Scotland. At the moment, Scotland's share of green jobs is abysmal. I mean, we are buying the towers for wind farms, for example, from China and the Middle East, and there's the environmental cost of transporting them all the way from China. So we must invest in industry in Scotland that produces these renewable forms of electricity generation.
Thank you very much. We'll now go on to Ariane.
Yeah, so the Scottish Greens have a commitment to renewable energy, and as has been said, Scotland could lead the way in Europe with renewable energy. So for onshore wind, we have a commitment to sourcing at least 70% of the onshore wind supply chain from Scottish businesses, encouraging at least 20% of new wind farms to be owned by the community, so that communities actually benefit from that. And for just some of the things that we want to do with hydropower, so tidals, we want to create a 25 million per year revenue support program for the early stages of tidal, because we're still, in that development phase. And we'd like to invest 50 million per year in marine renewables and local economic development fund to invest in the local infrastructure, again, for communities. It's absolutely essential that we move in this direction. And one of the things that you'll possibly know about both the SNP and the Tories is that they have actually a commitment to maximum extraction of oil and gas going forward, and that actually needs to stop right now.
Great, thank you very much. Now, Mary.
Thanks very much. Well, not only do we have peat bogs up here in Caithness, Sutherland and Ross, but we've also got massive renewable energy potential. In the Pentland Firth alone, there's about 25% of the tidal energy potential in the whole of Europe. I think we have a huge opportunity in Scotland and in the Highlands and Islands to end our contribution to climate change, and we could lead the way to a decarbonised age. We really could. And I think we already have in Scotland the most ambitious world targets in law for emissions reduction. And that is partly because we recognise our moral responsibility for that challenge, but also because we have an economic responsibility to harness the assets that we have and to ensure that we innovate and make that just transition to using those assets in future. I think we've got an economic responsibility to harness those assets and to use them for the people to benefit the people who live here. And I think we could see some really, high wage jobs and some, securing some skilled jobs in some of the most fragile environments in the country. And that's before we even get onto the potential for green hydrogen and green ports and electric flight, which we're innovating up in Orkney.
Thank you, Mary. Now, John.
Thanks, Evan. Look, I agree with what the other speakers have said about the Highlands and Islands being at the absolute forefront of the potential to transform our energy sector in Scotland. We have the majority of the wind, wave and tidal energy that we can utilise in Scotland. So absolutely, the Highlands and Islands should be at the heart of any green recovery for Scotland. Now, what I think we haven't seen is the associated jobs and the industrial strategy that sits alongside that. As Alan said, we've seen a lot of offshoring of the jobs that are connected in the supply chain, linked with the green jobs in the Highlands. So, for example, offshore wind jackets being produced in Denmark, for example, instead of in places like Bifab and Fife, or other industrial sites in Scotland. So what we need to do is look at the potential that's out there in the North Sea and the Highlands and Islands in terms of energy, but we also need to look at the supply chain and how we actually bring those jobs and business to the Highlands and Islands to the benefit of local communities. You can't repeat what the mistakes that were made with the oil boom in the 70s and 80s. We can't see companies come in and make a massive profit and leave communities behind. So we need to take communities with us and make sure that we actually have decent green jobs for the long term in the Highlands and Islands associated with any green industrial revolution.
Great, that was a really interesting response. We'll now move on to our fourth question, which will be asked by Holly.
So the Highland Council Carbon Clever targets state that the Highlands will be a low carbon area and Inverness carbon neutral by 2025. Understandably, it is necessary and perhaps easier to decarbonise the bigger city, but there is a need to ensure equity in development of low carbon systems and microeconomies across communities of all scales in order to meet our net zero targets. How will you ensure equity in decarbonisation across the entire Highland region and not just Inverness?
Such an interesting question. Thank you so much, Holly. We'll start with Ariane.
Thanks, Holly. Yeah. So I think it's about making sure kind of rural proofing and making sure that there's funding going to all parts of Highland, all parts of our region, actually. And I think there are some areas that we need to focus on in terms of decarbonising. So transport, we talked about already. Housing is going to be a big piece of how we get carbon out. So that's we want to roll out a a housing programme which would both decarbonise by retrofitting housing across the region, but also would tackle our issue of housing affordability for people. So more investment in social housing and the whole retrofitting bit. Farming, we would also look at that, and we've already kind of made a step in that direction by securing £5 million towards farming for farmers who are planning to farm in ways that are more with nature, holistic management, and so on and so forth. So I think it is a matter of rural proofing and ensuring that we're not just focusing on the urban areas. And I absolutely have a commitment to doing that if I was elected to Holyrood.
Thank you. We'll now go on to Mary.
Hi there, thanks. It is an excellent question, and it does ensure that we focus on some of the equity issues associated with decarbonisation. It shouldn't just be for those who can afford it or for those for whom it is easy. I do think, though, that the problem is urgent, and we probably need to go for the low-hanging fruit first, because we need to make a difference. We need to turn this problem around really, really quickly. So going for the centres of population does seem sensible, in the same way as when we were decarbonising energy, electricity was the first place to go. I think now we've shown we have a track record of we haven't fully decarbonised electricity, but we've done pretty well. And now we're looking at the more difficult things like agriculture, like heat. And I think the same applies here. We need to learn lessons in the cities where the big numbers and the big polluters are. And we need to then make sure that we use the lessons that we've learned to roll out right throughout the country.
Thank you very much, Mary. John?
Thanks, Erin. It's an excellent question because we've seen time and time again, peripheral parts or more rural and remote parts of the Highlands and Islands are often left behind when it comes to policy making. You look at things like the rollout of super fast broadband, and it's the Highlands and Islands that are falling behind. So I certainly feel that many people I speak to in the Highlands and Islands do often feel left behind or forgotten about by government, and Holyrood and Inverness can seem particularly far away when you're on Skye or other parts of the Highlands. So yeah, building in that rural proofing policies into everything we do is key to decarbonising the economy. Certainly Inverness is likely to be decarbonised before other parts of Highland, but that's, which is a policy failing. And I think Scottish Government needs to be much more ambitious in supporting councils to devolve that decision-making down and deliver power out to other parts of the Highlands. Look, I mean, there's ambitious plans out there. I don't know if you've seen the Cromarty hydrogen hub that's been proposed. That would decarbonise our bus service, that could decarbonise industry, and that would all stem out from Cromarty Firth out into other parts of the Highlands. So I really support those ambitious targets and ambitious plans that could really revolutionise how we decarbonise our economy right across the Highlands and Islands, and not just in our major centres of population like Inverness.
Thanks for that. And lastly, we'll go to Alan.
Alan, you're on mute.
Thanks for that, Mark.
Sorry about that. Right, I'll start again. Very important question. It's vital that rural areas are not left behind, that government supports rural areas to decarbonise. Heating homes is a costly issue, and where people are heating their homes by oil or gas at the moment, we have to help those in low incomes to replace that oil and gas by some renewable methods such as solar, air source heat pumps, district heating. Also, we have to help them to insulate their homes. As John said, we need to roll out superfast broadband. That reduces the need to travel and it helps towards decarbonisation. The transport sector is also very important. We've already discussed the importance of integrated public transport and the free bus scheme for young people to be extended to ferries, but we've also got to tackle cars. We have to convert cars from petrol and diesel to electricity, and the government has to support that by making sure that there are charging points everywhere in our rural areas, so that people in rural areas as well as people in cities can drive electric cars. Okay, as your hand's up, I'll stop there.
I had 10 seconds left, but that's great. We'll move on to our fifth question now, which is from May.
How will you provide support for small-scale Highland workers, such as support for crofting and creel fishing? These livelihoods are part of our culture and community life in the Highlands, and are often more sustainable than large-scale fishing and agriculture. However, big agricultural businesses, trawlers and fish farms are often far more subsidised and favoured for subsidies and emissions. What will your party and you do to ensure that small-scale traditional agriculture and industry in the Highlands are provided with enough support to continue their livelihoods, while also becoming sustainable and not working with nature and not against it?
Thank you. Such a relevant question to the Highlands. We'll hear a response from Mary first.
Thanks. Yes, it is an excellent question. And as somebody who grew up in a fishing village, I'm more than aware of the impact that Brexit's had on the community that I live in. So it couldn't be more, important at the moment to be thinking about how to support these industries and make sure they're on a sustainable footing. I think I mentioned that we'd launched a crofting plan just in the last week. I think that considering how to ensure that these industries are sustainable in future is really, really important. And you can do that as a government, you can do that by encouraging and rewarding certain types of behaviour. So with crofting, they're looking at, as I said, encouraging people into peatland restoration, tree planting and diversification. But crofting is an absolutely vital part of our life. Fishing is an absolutely vital part of almost all the communities around the coast in the Highlands and Islands as well. We've done great work with marine protected areas. I'm the flame shell champion in the Scottish Parliament, and that little mollusk makes the most amazing nests, which are really, really important and vital nursery beds for lots and lots of commercial stock. Protecting things like the flame shell from dredgers, which we've a really strong track record of doing, is an important part of ensuring that fishing remains sustainable in future.
Thank you very much. We'll now have John.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge to keep these industries in the Highlands and Islands afloat, particularly in the face of Brexit and the economic damage that is going to do. So we need to look holistically at how we keep these jobs and the industries alive in Scotland, and that might be subsidy, it might be new plans, it might be better legislation. But I think we need to go back to the fundamentals, and it's about keeping our population here and reversing the population to decline to support these industries into the future to ensure that they can continue sustainably. So, you look at housing, that's what we need to focus on and make sure that our young people can stay and bring more people into the Highlands and Islands. We need to make sure that there isn't too much of a focus on going into FEHE, further education, higher education, if there are apprenticeship opportunities or work opportunities within these sectors in the Highlands and Islands, because we fundamentally need to make sure we have a young workforce and a workforce that are willing to stay in the Highlands and Islands and support these industries and sectors. So absolutely, ensuring that there's a decent environmental protections and issues like Brexit aren't used to undermine those. Making sure that we can support small communities, fishing communities and farming communities and crofting communities right across the Highlands and Islands. It's a big challenge, but I think we need to go back to the fundamentals to ensure that we can keep our population here to fill those jobs of the future.
Thanks for that. And we'll now go on to Alan.
Yes, it's an important question. Our agricultural sector is a significant contributor to carbon emissions, and a big effort must be made to change that. I mean, farmers understand nature and understand the importance of decarbonisation, but they do need government support to do this. And as Liberal Democrats, we were successful in getting £5 million added to the Scottish budget for environmental support for farmers. Scotland has a substantial agricultural sector. We must ensure that's sustainable. I mean, one of the bad things at the moment about the food sector is that after the farmer has produced the food, it then often gets transported hundreds of miles, gets packaged, and then gets sent hundreds of miles back to local shops. We need to change the food packaging and distribution system so that food that is grown locally is eaten locally. We also have to make sure that we don't undermine our high quality food standards by poor quality food imports that are produced in ways that would be against the law in this country. Trade deals must have a clause in them that about the food is produced, if it's to be imported, it has to conform to our environmental and animal welfare standards.
Thank you very much. Lastly, we'll go on to Ariane.
So I think the pandemic really helped bring it home to so many people that shopping locally and local provision from our local growers and our farmers was something that was, enriching of life, really. And I think there's been a massive change in people really looking for more locally sourced food. So the question here was kind of specifically around crofting. So one of the things I think we need to do is that there are challenges around crofting. I know so many young people who actually want to take on crofts but can't. So I think one of the things we need to do is start to look at it comes back to land reform, but specifically with crofting, let's put more funding into the crofting commission so it actually can carry out its job properly. And one of the things that I know they want to do is look at crofts that are not being used somehow being brought back in and made accessible to people who want to work them. Then we could do things like increase direct support for crofting, but also for market gardening businesses. We could provide so one of the other issues is that people produce meat, but we've had abattoirs closing down. So we could have mobile abattoirs. So it's like access to the equipment and tools and things that people need in order to produce their food. So we could establish local crofter and producer food co-ops so that we could sell directly to the public.
Thank you, sorry. Thank you, though. We're now going to go on to our last question, which is from Lily.
Vital that teachers have an understanding of the climate crisis so that they can teach students about it and pass on the skills and knowledge needed to live sustainably. This week, Teach the Futures released some research which shows that 70% of teachers have not been trained to teach the climate change. How will your party ensure that teachers are able to incorporate the climate and ecological crisis in their lessons across the curriculum?
Thank you very much. We'll start with John.
Thanks for the question, Lily. I'm really keen to see the Teach the Futures asks carried out by the Scottish Government. In my previous work, I actually worked for Scottish Labour's education spokesperson Ian Gray, and I know the campaign had been in touch with the Labour Party certainly about pressuring the Scottish Government to take this forward. So I know colleagues Claudia Beamish and Ian have raised this with John Swinney and the government, and I was pleased to see that they were willing to listen to the campaign's asks and look at embedding this into the curriculum. This is absolutely crucial. I went through school and didn't learn much about climate change, and I think next generation are much more aware and alert to the climate crisis that we all face. So embedding that into the curriculum and making sure that we can get more people interested in tackling the biggest issue that we're facing globally right now is absolutely essential. So certainly we've got a commitment from the Labour Party to bring these issues forward and continue to press the government to include them in our curriculum, because it's absolutely crucial that we include decarbonisation, better teacher training, and make sure the environment and education about the environment runs through all strands of Scottish education. So I think there's flexibility in Curriculum for Excellence to do it, and I certainly do want to see the campaigns asks brought forward in the next Parliament.
Thanks, that was great. We'll go on to Alan now.
Well, young people have already shown that they have an awareness of the climate emergency, and many young people could teach older people a great deal. It is important that the education system, any education system should be designed to ensure that every child reaches their full potential. And preparing students for the climate emergency should be an important part of the curriculum. I think we need to start with teacher training and include climate emergency and the need for biodiversity in teacher education, and including along with that a new professional teacher qualification in that subject. If we're to motivate schools, then I think part of the motivating schools has to be an increased priority for sustainability in school inspections and educational rankings. I think there needs to be a review into how the Scottish education system is preparing students for the climate emergency. And then after that review has been concluded, the lessons from that review should then be enshrined in law by the Scottish Parliament.
Thank you, that was great. We'll now have Ariane.
Yeah, so I think, yes, it would be great if this climate science was, everybody is learning that, but I think there's more. It's like, yeah, we can kind of like know about the science and know there's an urgency, but what I hear from so many young people, or people who are concerned or worried about the future is, what do we do? And so I think that there's a whole other part of climate education, which is the skill sets to handle the emotional fallout, or to think well in this, while feeling kind of anxious and worried. How do we think well? How do we design well about what we actually need to be doing? And then also, I think just some kind of practical skill sets training that you may not use in your career, but give you a sense of, give people a sense of empowerment that they can, actually make something with their hands or grow something. So I think that it shouldn't just be about climate science, but it needs to be about having the power to create the solutions ourselves.
Thank you very much. We'll now go on to Mary.
Thanks very much. When I saw the question written, I actually had the radical thought that it is for the younger generation to alert the older generation. That's what we've seen happening so successfully around the world. Greta Thunberg absolutely lit the world up and made everybody aware. So in some ways, I think expecting old fuddy-duddy teachers to be teaching you guys about climate change, you guys, it's a dynamic relationship education, and it's absolutely essential that your education equips you with inquiring minds, an ability to stand up for what you believe in, articulate your ideas, find good resources to educate yourselves. And I do think that what's happened around the world with regard to climate change activism, particularly amongst young people, is a real credit, and certainly in Scotland, it's a real credit to the education system. There are things in the curriculum already with learning for sustainability, which has a bit of a focus on food production. As a junior education minister, I have responsibility for very young children's education, and I have a bit of a passion for outdoor learning. I think it's obvious that we should use that asset in Scotland. I would like to see it as being a cornerstone of our education system going forward. The Scottish offer is about outdoor education, and I think then we'll grow future good stewardship of our environment naturally.
Thank you. They were all such incredible responses for all of our questions, so thank you very much. Those are the last of our pre-prepared questions. So now we're going to go on to the live questions coming from our panelists. And I think we're going to have Holly asking the first question.
Sorry, just trying to find it. Okay, so is building a new spaceport on pristine peat bog a wise thing to do, and will the Scottish Government call in the approval in Caithness?
Thank you, that's great. We'll start with Alan Reid.
Sorry, I didn't hear this. I couldn't hear very well. I got the second part of the question, but I didn't hear the start of it. Could you say it again, please?
Holly, could you say it again, or could somebody put it in the chat?
No,
I see it now. It's in the chat.
Thank you.
Right. I think the spaceport is important. I mean, I'm not from Caithness and Sutherland, but I understand it's not in a protected area of peat bog, and I think it is. I think it could be a tremendous boost to the local economy, and I think the spaceport should go ahead.
Thanks for your response. Ariane, are you okay to answer this, or are you still having trouble with power supplies? If you are, I can
I'll answer this, and then I'll go and get my power supply.
Okay.
Yeah, so just in general, spaceports are needed. We do need to put satellites into orbit, as much as I dread to think how many are up there circling the Earth, but some of them are for very good reasons. For example, keeping track of weather patterns and making sure that life on Earth is going well. Having said that, I think we do need to think very carefully about where we do put them. And I think that the Highlands and Islands Greens have looked into the spaceport in Caithness, and we're not happy about it. So, yeah.
I was muted. Wow. Next, we'll go on to Mary, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah. So when I answered an earlier question, I said it's really, really important for us to innovate and develop some of the solutions. And I do think that spaceports can be part of the solution to climate change. As Ariane said, we need to be able to monitor what's happening with the weather. We need to be able to use this technology in order to, we can use it for good. The other thing that concerns me about this particular one, so I hear an awful lot, as you might imagine, being in Caithness, Sutherland and Ross, of concern about new development. The most common thing that's reported to me as a concern is a concern about sustainability of life, young people not having opportunities and not having good employment opportunities. And at some point we have to make—
Thank you, sorry, that's time. We're quite short at the moment, but thank you. We'll now go on to John.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I want to see the spaceport come to the far north of Scotland. I think it has the potential to bring a huge economic boost and benefit to the Highlands and Islands. As Ariane has said, it's not anti-green or unenvironmentally friendly to develop a spaceport in the far north, because the reason we send up a lot of satellites are for environmental weather monitoring reasons, for example. I think what we need to be clear about is there needs to be a public good that goes with the spaceport. We can't let people like Elon Musk and other billionaires come in and use it for solely commercial purposes. So there needs to be a test and a reason for the spaceport to be there. But I think the scientific reasons and the jobs that are associated with it are a clear benefit to the Highlands and Islands. So I'm keen to see it situated in the north of Scotland.
Thanks for that. Well, now on to question 2. May, are you all right to ask that?
Of course. This question was, would it be possible to use cardboard or combustible containers for school canteens, as currently polystyrene is being used every day and schools can't make the change? 200 to 300 polystyrene containers per school each day to stay on this planet for 500 years is crazy.
Thanks, May. Ariane, are you okay to start this?
Yes, so yes, it would be possible. The packaging exists, and I think we just need to invest in it, and we need to support the school supply chains to make the change. If that's not already happening, I think we do have something around plastics coming in. I think in general with plastics and polystyrene and things like that, we should phase it all out and not have it coming into the country. I mean, why are we bringing things in that we then have to deal with that we can't deal with? So like plastic number 5, I don't understand why we have packaging like that.
Thanks for that. We'll now go on to Mary.
Sorry, unsuccessfully unmuted myself there, apologies. I think we need to be very thoughtful about cardboard and compostable alternatives to plastic. So there is some evidence, for example, that paper bags use more resources than plastic bags in terms of their development, and they're less reusable. We need to be very, very thoughtful about these things. One of the things I'm kind of passionate about is reduce, reuse, and then recycle. So instead of, thinking about what seems like a simple solution, a less compostable, do we need to use that type of packaging at all? Is the packaging needed in the first place? I would say is the question. I do think we need legislation to encourage behaviour. I don't think that this stuff happens by itself. I think we need to be guiding people in a more sustainable future using legislation and incentives.
Thank you. We'll now have John.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what the other speakers have said. I think we need to look holistically at the supply chain, and the question was specifically about schools. Schools should be sourcing their food as locally as possible and making sure that they use local resources and move away from packaged and other food coming from other parts of Scotland to the UK. Scottish Labour have been clear, we support a move away from the use of plastics, and specifically single-use plastics, towards a polycarbonate ban. And we want to see food manufacturers and retailers reduce that plastic food waste. So certainly it's something we need to do. And I agree with Marie Todd. I don't think this will happen overnight, and it does need the nudge of government to make sure that these changes do occur.
Cheers, thank you very much. Lastly, we'll have Alan.
Yes, well, I think I'm just going to be repeating what other speakers have said. I mean, it's clearly nonsense if 200 to 300 polystyrene containers in each school each day are just being thrown away. We have to move to, as far as plastics concerned, we have to move to single use, do away with single use plastic containers. I mean, we should only be having plastic containers if they're being reused day after day after day. And it's up to the Scottish Government and the councils to look at this. It's really not up to individual schools. It's up to Scottish Government and the councils to rectify this problem.
Thanks. There were great responses to that question. Lily, are you ready to ask a question?
Yeah. So will your party commit to ending the legal requirement to maximise extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea in the next Scottish Parliament? And if not, why not?
Thanks, that was a really great question. And we'll start with Mary. Or you might be on mute again.
No problem with unmuting myself, apologies. We have very ambitious climate change targets in law already, the most ambitious in the world, and I'm comfortable with where we are on that. I think we need to be very careful about a just transition. So if we think about some of the big overwhelming shifts that have happened before in this part of the world, I think about things like the clearances, where probably naturally people were moving away from an agrarian lifestyle to something different, and the way that governments managed it and the way that people managed it was absolutely devastating, and devastating for centuries. There are lots of people who have jobs in that. We need to be ensuring that people have alternative jobs. We've got loads of knowledge in this and loads of potential. We just need to manage the shift carefully so that it doesn't harm people.
Okay, thank you. We'll now have John.
I think I'm going to agree with Marie here again. You know, the changes needed in our industrial and energy strategies have to be accompanied by a just transition for workers and communities who are going to be most affected. Otherwise, the move to a low carbon economy risks increasing inequality in Scotland. You know, the interim just transition report highlighted the government had not managed to maximise the opportunities of decarbonisation. So we need to seriously look at that just transition and make sure that we can move towards decarbonisation, but ensure that people's livelihoods and communities aren't devastated as we do that. So that's a long-term project, and we're well set up in the Highlands and Islands and North East to manage that transition, but we just need to be very careful about how we do it.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really great hearing about just transition and everything from you guys. We'll next have Alan.
Well, I'm going to be repeating what other speakers have said again. I agree both with Marie and with John that we have to transition away from oil and gas to renewables and other green forms of running the country. And but the transition has to be done in a just way, in that we, as jobs in the oil and gas sector disappear, we have to invest in the areas where these jobs are to ensure that and also training the workers so that they have the skills to take new jobs in the renewables sector. And I'm sure we will not extract all the oil and gas that's in the North Sea.
Thank you very much. Lastly, we'll go to Ariane.
Yeah, so the Scottish Greens will support a progressive phase out of North Sea oil and gas production based on the principles of a just transition, because it's essential to protect the livelihoods and the economic well-being of the workers and the communities. And so a few things that we want to do is call on the UK government to stop issuing new licenses for oil and gas exploration and development, and revoke undeveloped licenses and instigate a review of current permits. We also want to end subsidies and tax breaks for the oil and gas industry, and we would like to challenge the Scottish Government's backdoor funding of the oil and gas sector through the channels such as the Oil and Gas Technology Centre.
Thank you very much. We'll now go on to another question. Holly, will you ask the question?
Yeah. How would your party tackle disinformation regarding climate issues? For example, green hydrogen is heralded as the solution to all our problems. There are so many specific places where it is practical, but overall it is too inefficient. For example, people need to be educated on the simple scientific facts regarding climate change.
Thanks for that. We'll start with John.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we're quite lucky in Scotland and the UK that climate change denial isn't as rampant as it is in other parts of the world. I think there is a general consensus in most mainstream parties and society in the UK that, you know, climate change is a serious issue and is something that needs to be at the top of the political agenda. I mean, obviously we've seen leaders in the United States recently suggesting that climate change isn't a real issue, and that certainly does feed that disinformation. And, you know, online we do need to tackle any of this sort of disinformation that's out there, but I think we're very lucky in Scotland that there is a general recognition that climate change is a major issue for us, and we can push forward with the agenda we need to see the change we need in the environment.
Great, thank you. We'll now go to Alan.
Yes, we have to challenge disinformation on climate issues. I mean, we live in a free country where people have freedom of speech, but the online world is just full of conspiracy theories and disinformation. And yes, that has to be challenged. We talked earlier about improving teaching of climate emergency in schools, but that has to apply to the whole of society. That I mean, as John said, that we tend to be better off in this country than some others, as far as not having too many climate change deniers, but we do have to challenge it and tell the truth about climate change.
Thank you very much. We'll now have Ariane.
Yeah, so yeah, I think we absolutely need to tackle misinformation about climate change and things like green hydrogen. I think we need to be calling that kind of thing out. Perhaps we could do things like create some kind of tax on advertising. So, you know, if a company is a polluting company, then its advertising is restricted, or it has to pay more to advertise. And I think we could also look at banning the Scottish government from funding polluting companies.
Thank you very much. That was great. Lastly, we'll have Mary.
So I would say there's a couple of things. One, I think in terms of protecting ourselves against disinformation, again, I think your education at school is quite important on that front. So learning the skills to be able to critically assess information that comes your way and decide whether it's likely to be true or likely to be untrue. I think that's a really important tenet of education nowadays. And it's really important to be able to tell, because stuff, you know, there is lots of stuff online that's very persuasive, and it's really important to be able to corroborate that information elsewhere. In terms of hydrogen, I don't think it's the whole answer, but I do think it's part of it. It gives us a chance to store electricity, and it gives us an opportunity to use it mobilely. And I think it gives us a simple way to transition without having to spend huge amounts of money in people's houses to a slightly greener form of natural gas.
Thank you. Next, we'll have, I think, one more question from the live Q&As. I think we just have time for it. May, are you all right to ask it?
Sure. This question is, salmon farms are the biggest polluters of water surrounding the west coast of Scotland. How is your party willing to tackle this heavy influence of industry?
Thank you so much.
Was that salmon farming?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, I think the important thing is that the industry is properly regulated. It does provide jobs in remote areas, but we cannot allow any industry to damage the environment. So the important thing is that the industry is regulated properly. I mean, I did read recently that SEPA had produced statistics to show that about 1 in 5 of our salmon farms had a very poor record in the environment, but they didn't actually seem to be taking any action. I think it's important that SEPA regulates salmon farms properly, and that there are fines and action taken if any salmon farm breaks environmental regulations.
Thank you very much. We'll now go on to Ariane.
So the Scottish Greens are passionate about doing something about salmon farming. So we want to introduce a moratorium on the licensing of new salmon farms and the expansion of existing ones until environmental and animal welfare concerns are addressed. We want to insist on stricter monitoring of regimes for the environmental impacts and the fish health and welfare. We will give regulators the power to close down failing farms, and we want to ban the use of acoustic deterrent devices on fish farms, which cause pain and distress to marine animals. We also want to see a phase out of open cage farming. And we want to support levies on the industry to invest in innovation with the aim to delivering high welfare systems that prevent pollution, livestock escapees, and parasite breakouts.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Mary.
So I would say, having grown up in the West Highlands, salmon farming was a very important feature of the economy at a time when lots of our fishermen weren't able to fish, so when there was a ban on herring. I do think we have come a long way So when I think back to 30 years ago, when I was a youngster, the way that they were farming then was not at all sustainable, and it was a relatively new technology then. I think there's been great improvements, but I think we do need to go further, and I think we need to go further with urgency. I do think it is possible to farm salmon though in an environmentally friendly and sustainable way. You need to choose your sites carefully, and you need to regulate the industry well.
Thank you for that. John, would you last?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with what Marie and Alan have said here. I mean, I do think sustainable salmon farming is key to a lot of jobs in the Highlands and Islands and on the West Coast. So I wouldn't want to see it phased out at all. I agree, regulation is what we need. Certainly those statistics that Alan have highlighted about the failure of action to be taken against producers who aren't living up to the environmental standards we would expect, they need to be tackled. There obviously is environmental concerns associated with salmon farming, so we just need to make sure that the correct regulation is in place to maintain those high environmental standards that we would expect of any food producer in Scotland.
Thanks, that's great. I actually think we have time for another question because we're whizzing through these, so this is great. And so we'll have our last question from Lily.
The emissions from the production of plastic in Scotland are huge and will be equivalent to 615 coal plants by 2050 if we continue under the current projections. This is incompatible with Scotland's net zero targets. How will your party deal with this problem?
Thanks, that's such a great question. We'll start with Ariane.
So we're committed to tackling plastic pollution and delivering a dramatic reduction of single-use plastics in the next decade. So we'll phase out pointless plastics, including single-use non-essential plastics that can be easily replaced by 2025, while ensuring disabled people have non-stigmatizing access to plastic straws until suitable alternatives are developed. We want to move towards a circular economy whereby all packaging and products sold in Scotland must be readily able to be reused, repaired or recycled, with producers responsible for the costs of managing their products through the life cycle. And we want to improve accessibility to sustainable alternatives by supporting circular economy pilots, as well as research and development.
Great, thank you for that. We'll go on to Mary.
Thanks. One of the many sadnesses of the last year in terms of the response to the pandemic has been that we are using, I believe, a great deal more in the way of single-use plastic. Because of that concern about contamination, there's a lot more throwaway material being used. And I just, I find that deeply distressing that that step back has come as a result of the pandemic. We need to get focusing on the issue again. One little thing, I mean, I was distressed as a mum when I discovered that nappies take 500 years to biodegrade. We have in the baby box a voucher for reusable nappies that are made in Scotland. And I think that just illustrates how deeply ingrained our use of plastic is and how hard we'll need to work to get it out of our lives.
Yeah, thank you. We'll now go on to John.
Thanks again. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we need to move plastics in Scotland and across the UK. I mean, it's just a huge issue, and without some serious and targeted government action, we're not going to make the changes we need as quickly as we need to make them. So I think, looking ahead to the COP26 conference in Glasgow, it really offers another opportunity for Scotland to be at the heart of moving away and having ambitious plans to tackle climate change. So I hope that COP26 gives us as a focus for a green economic recovery, and as part of that, it's going to involve us moving away from single-use plastics and making sure that everything in Scotland is much more sustainable and reusable than we have been in the past.
Thank you. We'll now have our last response of the event from Alan.
Yes, we have to move away from single-use plastics. I mean, the plastic bag levy in supermarkets has been a great success, and we have to build on that success. I mean, the deposit return scheme, where people get money back to return plastic bottles, for example. That's a good step, but we have to go further. We need, for example, a coffee cup levy. So I think we tackle it in various ways. One is through education. We encourage people to avoid the use of plastics if at all possible. If it's not possible, then to keep reusing the plastic bottle. There's education, there's encouragement, and there's also financial incentives, as was shown with the plastic bag levy. That worked. So we need to do the same with the deposit return scheme.
That's the time. Thank you very much. That's great. Great. Well, that's the end of our question and answers. We'll now just have a quick round of responses from the students to the politicians of all of the responses tonight. And we'll start with Holly.
Yeah, so first off, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me to speak tonight, and to the politicians for taking time out of their busy schedules to answer our questions. So thank you. I think I agree with pretty much everything you all said, which I'm very happy about. The only thing I had a major issue with was your attitudes towards the ski sport, because Scotland has declared a climate and ecological emergency, and building a spaceport on internationally important Peatland does not align with that. I was really interested to hear your views on transport and rural decarbonisation, because, as someone who lives in a remote rural area in the Highlands, I feel that rural locations are not being given the same opportunities to decarbonise as cities like Inverness, and it is vital that we are included in the solution while ensuring that it is done in a way that is fair and takes into account the unique experiences and cultures of different communities. That also applies to the aspect of transport. I've met with politicians who have said that it is the public's responsibility out of their cars and take public transport, but very often public transport just isn't available or accessible, and I really hope the politicians here tonight will help to change that. This feels very cliched, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the climate and ecological emergency will impact our generation the most, and it is what we will be thinking about when we decide who we are going to vote for. The upcoming Scottish election needs to be a climate election, and I hope you and your party will prioritise the environment moving forward, both before and after the election. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Holly. We'll now go on to May.
I would like to thank all the politicians and all the people behind the scenes who made this happen. Thank you, because it is so important. So I would like to ask you, to all the adults here today, what did you worry about when you were my age at 17? What did you spend your free time doing? Because I don't think it was organising climate justice and your generation. I'm sure it wasn't striking from school and the hours of work behind the scenes that you don't see when we do climate action. Recently, I was asked by a number of people why I do it, and my response is that I can't not do it. For me, not taking action is as good as being the perpetrator. The positivity I've heard today gives me hope that we are edging closer to a better future, especially around sustainable agriculture in Highlands and commitments for the land reform of our peat bogs, especially not just protecting the land that we have, but also improving the quality. From Labour, that was especially great to hear, and the call for transparency from the Greens was also excellent. I'm excited to see how the SNP can integrate peat bog protection and sustainable crofting into their crofting policy. Also, the support for small-scale Highlands industry and crofting through community support is very encouraging, as that is where sustainable food systems through packaging and rigorously checked import standards can really drive down our emissions. The cross-party support for just transition from fossil fuels is also something that I'm very grateful to hear. However, as Holly is, I'm also slightly concerned that profit will be prioritised over people and the planet in the case of the Highlands spaceport. Words are only as good as the actions behind them. Today is one of the Global Fridays for Future Days of Climate Action, with the theme No More Empty Promises, which I think is very fitting here. Millions of youth and adults globally drop everything to ask you, as politicians and older generations, to act now as part of the solution to the global climate crisis and the climate justice movement. The people have power, but we need you to use yours for good. Don't waste it by feeding us false solutions. Be a leader and lead us to a better, clean and green future. I want you all to recognise that your actions not only apply to us here in Scotland, but also affect people globally. We need solidarity across borders. Emissions cross whatever imaginary lines we will draw on a map. I speak on behalf of marginalised communities, women, youth in rural areas, and LGBT+. I stand in solidarity beside those communities that I'm not part of, such as people of colour and immigrant communities, and I will amplify their voices using my privilege as a cis white woman to ask you for climate justice so that all of our society can live in a just and peaceful life. I cannot ignore this suffering as we are siblings in the fight for 1.5 degrees of warming or below, and consequently, that means our future. I want you to put your money where your mouths are, as put so well by Sisters Uncut. They cut and we bleed. I don't want you to subsidise climate breakdown fueling systems such as the meat and dairy industry, poisoning our atmosphere with methane, which, by the way, has a 100-year global warming potential 25 times that of CO2. I want you to fund our future dependent on renewable energy and a just transition from fossil fuels. I don't want you to promise us false solutions as carbon capture and storage won't cut it. We need to reduce emissions, not produce more greenhouse gases on the premise that we can make it right later. I want you to promise us safe and just futures, and critically, to make your promises real by taking the actions desperately needed in the Highlands, nationally and globally. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, May. Lily, do you want to go now?
Yeah, so I'd like to start by thanking our panelists for joining us this evening and letting us ask you questions around climate change. It's my first time voting in this upcoming election, and it was really inspiring to hear responses to the other panelists and asked questions. Firstly, climate change is something that affects us all, no matter what part of the Highlands you live in, whether that's Inverness like myself, John O'Groats, and anywhere in between. Having accessible transport is a key approach to connecting Inverness to the rural areas in the Highlands, and it pleased me to hear that there were many ideas of how to connect Inverness to the other areas, and that all your parties are trying to improve this. I'm glad to hear that everyone is in agreement that we need to end unsustainable practices in relation to the full country, but as Holly touched upon, I'm also disappointed by your responses to this, to the spaceport question. And as someone who works with the Teach the Future campaign, I found it incredibly interesting to hear the responses given tonight around education. I'm in S5 and I haven't done climate education since S2, and even then it was a short topic in geography. I've had to educate myself in the climate crisis, but it worries me what my peers know and if they're aware of the effects of climate change to the extent Holly, May and I are. I do hope that change can come to ensure that students are taught the skills required to go up and live sustainably as my generation maps. I think that tonight has given youth in the Highlands a chance to engage with local politicians in a way that may have not been so likely before the school strikes for climate began in 2018. It is so empowering to be able to say that I can make a difference and that my vote does matter. Overall, I hope that my future and these answers given today have cemented in my mind that we need to ensure climate justice stays at the top of the agenda, but not just in the election period and afterwards too, as it's going to be so important for future generations and it's really going to be the biggest thing my generation faces. Thanks.
Thank you so much to everybody, and thanks to everybody coming. I've personally found this event really engaging, and it was so interesting to talk about topics that are so close to heart and that I can really associate with my day-to-day life and those that I know around me. And it's really interesting to talk about in the specific context of the Highlands, rather than just like the national commitments we have as Scotland. I particularly liked the talk about localization and decentralization of power, whether this was with transport or through crofting, and hearing about the topics such as fish farming, which I really have a keen interest in, and I wish that we could continue this discussion on and talk about it more, and maybe we can at some future point. And I'm also grateful that despite being on Zoom, we've been able to come together and not only hear the views of and put questions to our politicians, but we've also been able to develop connections with them and discuss important topics, whether I agree with what you say or not. Just the discussion is really important. And I think that relationships between the constituents and representatives is such an important thing. So I'm really glad we managed to have this event tonight. I hope that the youth panelists and those watching feel like you've been heard, and that you also learned a bit more about what our representatives or prospective representatives think about such important topics and such relevant topics. And I hope our prospective candidates have gained more understanding of what kind of things young people in the area would like to see prioritised. And I really look forward to action being taken upon this. And once again, thank you so much to all of the panelists for taking the time to speak at the event. And thank you to the team of volunteers from Fridays for Future Scotland and from Teach the Future, who have worked so hard to make this happen, whether it's through tech or promoting or talking to politicians. And yeah, you've all done a really great job, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you later.